The legend begins with a secret birth and an impossible choice. A priestess places her newborn in a basket of rushes, seals the basket with bitumen, and sits it adrift on the Euphrates River. Carried by the current, the infant is found by a man drawing water for the gardens. He adopts the boy as his own, raising him in obscurity to work the soil. From these humble roots, the gardener's son rose to become Sargon of Akkad, the conqueror who brought the disparate kingdoms of Mesopotamia under a single, absolute authority. This story survived for thousands of years as a historical biography. In reality, the rags to riches narrative was a functional piece of political propaganda designed to disrupt the existing power structures of the ancient world. Prior to Sargon's rise, Mesopotamia was a fractured landscape. Major centers like Kish, Uruk, and Ur functioned as independent city-states, locked in a cycle of localized warfare. They fought over arable land and water rights, dismantling each other's walls for centuries. Inside these cities, a hereditary elite maintained a strict monopoly on power. The ruling families claimed a divine right to govern, extracting massive taxes from the working-class laborers who built their temples and farmed their land. In this system, there was no mobility. Without the proper royal bloodline or a direct claim to divine favor, a commoner had no legitimate path to leadership. Sargon's humble gardener myth was an attempt to bypass this aristocratic roadblock. By presenting himself as an orphan of the people, he turned his lack of royal blood into a political asset, appealing directly to the disenfranchised masses to support his takeover. The historical record suggests a much more direct route to power. Sargon's actual career began inside the royal court of the city of Kish. He served King Ur-Zababa as his cupbearer. This was not a domestic service role. The cupbearer was a high-level advisor who managed the king's table and, by extension, his safety. Sargon stood at the center of the court, learning its secrets and identifying its political weaknesses. As Sargon gained influence among the court and the common citizens, Ur-Zababa grew suspicious of his subordinates' popularity and ambition. To remove the threat, the king attempted a covert assassination. He dispatched Sargon to a rival king, Lugal-Zagessi, with a diplomatic tablet that secretly ordered Sargon's execution upon arrival. Sargon used the betrayal to his advantage. He transformed an attempted execution into the perfect justification for a coup, abandoning his king and joining forces with the very man who was supposed to kill him. Sargon negotiated a military alliance with King Lugal-Zagessi, convincing him that their combined strength could dismantle the power of Kish forever. Their joint assault shattered the defenses of Kish, forcing Ur-Zababa into hiding and ending his dynasty. The alliance lasted only until Kish was taken. Sargon turned his new army against Lugal-Zagessi, laying siege to his capital and tearing down its walls. After the city fell, Sargon captured Lugal-Zagessi and placed him in a bronze neck collar, dragging him in chains to the sacred gate of the god Enlil. This was a public demonstration of religious dominance. By dragging the king before his own patron deity, Sargon signaled to the populace that Lugal-Zagessi's god had transferred his favor to the conqueror. By manipulating two kings into their own destruction, Sargon replaced the traditional reliance on divine right with a new, ruthless form of realpolitik. This map shows the scale of the resulting empire. Governing a territory that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean required more than just conquest. It required a total administrative overhaul. Sargon stabilized his borders by creating history's first professional army. He maintained a standing force of 5,400 men to enforce his decrees and suppress dissent before it could spread. He followed this with a political purge. In every city he conquered, he removed the local Sumerian lords and installed loyal Akkadian governors who reported directly to him. His most sophisticated maneuver was the appointment of his daughter, Enheduanna, as the high priestess of the moon god in the city of Ur. Enheduanna unified the empire's diverse population by merging Akkadian and Sumerian gods into a single religious system. Through her hymns, she recast her father's rule as a divine necessity, controlling the subjects' beliefs from within their own temples. Sargon had built a three-pillared system: professional military enforcement, a centralized bureaucracy, and an engineered state religion. This combination provided the structural strength to maintain an empire of this magnitude. Sargon's 56-year reign was defined by the constant, violent suppression of internal revolts, as the conquered city-states struggled to regain their autonomy. The Akkadian kings recorded their methods of control in their art. This relief depicts soldiers and the king trampling defeated enemies, a stark warning to anyone considering rebellion. Despite this rigid control, the empire was physically fragile. Within a few generations, a major drought and foreign invasions caused the Akkadian infrastructure to collapse into these ruins. Sargon's physical domain failed because the cost of maintaining absolute authority over such a vast, diverse population was too high for the ancient world to sustain. While his cities fell, the Akkadian model of governance became the standard for all future Mesopotamian rulers. These idealized features belonged to a dynasty that later kings, from the Babylonians to the Assyrians, spent centuries trying to emulate. They adopted Sargon's titles, his military structure, and his methods of administrative control. Sargon's reign replaced the ancient model of the independent city-state with a centralized blueprint that dominated the Near East for 2,000 years. By choosing the throne name legitimate king and using his daughter to rewrite the relationship between the gods, he demonstrated that royal authority could be constructed through statecraft. Sargon of Akkad conquered the world with a professional army, but he held it by persuading his subjects he was one of them. He proved that a ruler didn't need to be born divine, they simply needed to control the story. For centuries, the plains of ancient Sumer were locked in a cycle of localized, grinding violence. Independent city-states like Uruk, and Lagash fought endlessly over borders and water rights, with no single authority strong enough to hold the region together. Around 2334 BCE, a cupbearer in the northern city of Kish seized the throne, took the name Sargon, meaning legitimate king, and swept south. He systematically dismantled the walls of 34 Sumerian cities, defeating rival kings and absorbing their territories into a single domain. Sargon now controlled a continuous stretch of land spanning different ethnicities, languages, and cultures, many of whom deeply resented being subjugated. He was ruling a multinational entity that had no historical precedent. Winning battles only changes the lines drawn on a map. Keeping those lines from erasing themselves the moment the army marches away requires an entirely new set of tools. To hold his conquest together, Sargon had to engineer the mechanics of empire from scratch. Instead of ruling from an established traditional city like Ur or Uruk, Sargon severed ties with Sumerian political baggage. He founded a completely new capital, Akkad, to serve as the blank slate administrative center of his state. Previously, warfare relied on seasonal peasant levies who had to return home for the harvest. Sargon dissolved these local militias, forming a permanent professional force. Imperial records boast 5,400 men ate bread daily in his presence. Maintained year-round, he could quickly dispatch these loyal phalanxes across diverse terrains without waiting for the agricultural cycle to end. To prevent local uprisings, Sargon systematically stripped native Sumerian elites of their authority. In their place, he installed his most trusted followers, known as the citizens of Akkad, as regional governors across 65 cities, reporting directly to the crown on any hint of dissent. Administration was standardized using the Akkadian language. To transmit sensitive state orders, his officials utilized the earliest known postal system, wrapping cuneiform tablets in outer clay envelopes marked with the sender's seal. A message could not be read without physically breaking the shell. Through a standing military, a loyalist bureaucracy, and secure communication, Sargon replaced a loose network of autonomous cities with a highly structured machine designed for top-down control. Maintaining 5,400 full-time soldiers and a sprawling network of loyalist governors required a continuous revenue stream. The agricultural surplus of Mesopotamia was not enough. The state needed to extract wealth from beyond its borders. Sargon established what was known as the Golden Quay at Akkad. He secured trade routes stretching down the Persian Gulf to import copper, timber, and lapis lazuli from Dilmun, Magan, and the distant Indus Valley civilization of Meluha, funneling these resources directly to his docks. To protect these economic interests, state power was projected outward. According to the ancient epic, The King of Battle, Sargon marched his army deep into the dense forests of the Anatolian highlands, specifically to defend Akkadian merchants who were being taxed and oppressed by a local ruler. Sargon recognized that internal stability depended on external extraction. By deploying military force to monopolize international trade routes, he established the blueprint for state-sponsored economic dominance. But wealth and military might alone could not permanently subdue the conquered Sumerian population. Beneath the surface of Sargon's administration, a deep ideological resentment festered among the people forced into his new system. Sargon's solution was a strategic infiltration of Sumerian culture. He appointed his own daughter, Enheduanna, as the high priestess of the moon god Nana at the Great Ziggurat of inserting Akkadian royal authority into one of the most conservative, powerful religious institutions in the south. Enheduanna's political objective was to weave the disparate populations together. She achieved this through deliberate religious syncretism, actively fusing the native Sumerian goddess Inanna with the Akkadian war goddess Ishtar to create a shared, unifying deity. This cultural integration was fiercely resisted. Late in Sargon's reign, a massive Sumerian uprising erupted. Rebel forces stripped Enheduanna of her title and drove her out of the city, forcing her into exile in the harsh surrounding desert. Rather than accepting defeat, she fought back with literature. Enheduanna composed The Exaltation of Inanna, an emotive, intensely personal poem designed to rally the fractured empire around her syncretized goddess. In doing so, she became the first author in human history to attach her name to her work. When physical coercion fails, a state must rely on belief. By manufacturing a shared cultural identity through religious texts, Enheduanna provided the ideological glue necessary to keep the Akkadian system from fracturing from within. Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, expanded the empire to its absolute maximum and took an unprecedented step. He declared himself a living god. Rendered at a massive scale, towering over all others, he wears the horned helmet of divinity, visually asserting absolute authority over the mortal realm. Yet the empire unraveled almost as quickly as it had expanded. The ultimate threat to Akkadian supremacy was not a rival military force or an internal rebellion, but a catastrophic shift in the global climate. Paleoclimatologists refer to it as the 4.2 kiloyear event, a severe, sudden drought that lasted for 3 centuries. The resulting crop failures triggered mass starvation, internal collapse, and an influx of Gutian invaders from the mountains, overwhelming the Akkadian defenses. The collapse of Akkad demonstrates a hard limit on human organization. A state can build the perfect administrative machine, but it remains entirely dependent on the stability of the environmental foundation it rests upon. The physical Akkadian state collapsed, but the model of a centralized professional empire endured. Sargon's strategies for provincial governance and military expansion were adopted and refined by later Mesopotamian powers, including the Old Babylonian Empire and the Neo-Assyrians. Yet, in a stark historical irony, the city of Akkad itself has completely vanished. Despite being the vital political and economic center of the ancient world, archaeologists have never located its ruins. The most probable location for the glorious capital is at the confluence of the Tigris and Diyala rivers, an area now entirely buried beneath the modern concrete urban sprawl of Baghdad, rendering it permanently out of reach. The monuments to the world's first hegemon were swallowed by the earth long ago, but the systems of centralized control, taxation, and coercion he invented never disappeared. They still govern human civilization today.